Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. Today, we're here to explore a critical topic that lies at the intersection of technology and defense strategy: the importance of bringing enterprise IT capabilities to the tactical edge to support the U.S. Navy. As we navigate an increasingly complex and dynamic security landscape, the ability to extend robust IT systems and capabilities and data-driven insights to the front line is not just an advantage, but it's essential. We'll be discussing how real-time data sharing enhances situational awareness, how integrated command and control systems can revolutionize decision-making, and the vital role of cybersecurity in protecting our operations. We'll also touch on how these capabilities drive efficiency, cost savings, and continuous innovation, ensuring that our naval forces remain agile, resilient, and ready for any challenge in the future. Join us as we unpack these key elements and examine the future of naval operations through the lens of enterprise IT at the tactical edge. Our panel today includes some experts who will delve into how advanced technologies can be leveraged, the importance of interoperability in a distributed and denied environment, and the overall impact on mission success. So let's get started. First, we have Captain Kevin White. Captain White recently rejoined NAVWAR PEO C4I. He was formerly the CSO aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln just a month ago. Abe's deployment was 5.5 months, including 107 days straight at sea in the Middle East. Captain White's most recent deployment experience has been highlighted in multiple news and media publications, as he is an early adapter of a new capability from PEO Digital called Flank Speed Edge, or C2. We are proud to have Captain White join us today to share in his experience and thought leadership. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
We also have on today's panel Ryan MacArthur. Ryan is Zscaler's Federal Chief Technology Officer and details how the cloud security company is helping the U.S. military deploy zero trust at the operational edge. Prior to joining Zscaler just a couple years ago, he was the PM to stood up JWCC, the $9 billion program responsible for delivering modernized cloud capabilities across the DoD enterprise that supports 4.3 million users. Before that, he spent 8 years in various positions in government as a technology advisor and spent 10 years in the U.S. Army, where he retired as a decorated chief warrant officer, but we're still going to let him participate in today's discussion. We also have Mr. Jason Keel. After 23 years of service in the United States Navy, Jason retired in February of 2024, serving aboard the U.S. Navy ship Comfort, deployed to New York on September 11th, Afghanistan in 2010, and Djibouti in 2020. Jason began his career as a government employee for the Navy as a customer advocate for the Oceans Technical Department at NAVFAC XWIC in July of 2024. He is dedicated to matchmaking stakeholder requirements with capability and industry and academic partners, specifically with new and emerging technology in an undersea environment. And we also have Mr. Kenny High. Kenny is SAIC's Vice President of C5ISR and Information Warfare Portfolio, overseeing major programs that include TACnet, ICEA, OneNet programs, and he has over 20 years of experience deploying the latest afloat and ashore networks worldwide. Thank you all for joining us today. So let's get started. We're going to start with Mr. Jason Keel. There's a lot of interaction between NAVFAC's Expeditionary Warfare Center and other Navy warfare centers. How does NAVFAC XWIC's Ocean Technical Team support and collaborate with the other warfare centers?
Yeah, Tim, thank you for that question. The key to collaboration is finding those core capabilities within each warfare center, and then within those strategic working groups, we get together and try to maximize our effectiveness by complementing each other in the capabilities that we have out there. So as resource sponsors come out and as there are these capability gaps that are found, those usually get sent down to the warfare centers and the research and development enterprise, and then it gets kind of pushed out to each warfare center. Collaboration is absolutely key, and I'd like to focus on the key aspects for XWIC and then other warfare centers and the key aspects that they have. So, for XWIC, we're the cable experts, the heavy marine handling experts, the marine geotech experts, and then we have waterfront domain.
So along those lines, what emerging new technology has really impressed you or surprised you as you're trying to meet those warfare demands?
Yeah, another great question. Yeah, so operating in the ocean is hard. It's a hard environment. It's cold. It's wet. You can't see. I am constantly impressed with how we're pushing the edge on acoustics and comms and distributed acoustic sensing within the infrastructure that exists. Physics is physics, and a strong understanding of how we can flex the physics, I guess, and be innovative to use those acoustics and the physics within the ocean to our advantage has really impressed me of late. And I think there's a lot more work to do in that field, and I don't think we're alone as far as there's a race with some of our adversaries to figure out just how to use the big ocean as to our advantage.
Well, speaking of emerging technologies and capabilities, Captain White, how has your experience with Flank Speed Edge, or C2, as part of your arsenal helped with your daily duties, and has it changed your operational model as a result? And what impact have you experienced or seen, either operationally or quality of life, that have surprised you?
It's a great question. Thank you, Tim. So just coming off Abraham Lincoln, I actually like the title of this panel, Enterprise IT at the Edge and Innovation, because those three words together kind of mutually feed each other. As we start to innovate enterprise IT at the edge, I think it actually adds some vagueness of what that means to be at the edge, whether we are on an aircraft carrier, a remote foreign operating base, even perhaps a submarine. As we innovate and add enterprise IT at the edge, we start to add normalcy at those locations, and I believe that we can create a real warfare advantage from that normalcy. The approach that we took was thinking about how to scale bandwidth services across services at the edge, categorize them in different areas, and draw benefit of that. We split those bandwidth services into bandwidth that affects morale, bandwidth that affects business applications, as well as bandwidth that supports tactical services. And they all mutually kind of feed each other in ways that we can induce a competitive advantage against our adversaries really anytime and anywhere. What I personally saw was how sailors respond to when you meet their needs, both from a morale perspective, as well as when we provide them bandwidth for their applications that affect their job. And what we find is that when sailors are taken care of in their personal lives and they have bandwidth that supports applications that affects their job, they're going to be more effective when it comes time to use that bandwidth for tactical operations. So that was really what I saw, was how those services were used on board a ship at scale on a combat deployment. I'm going to go through some of the unique use cases that we demonstrated tomorrow in a brief. However, I saw the sailors happier, and I saw them more effective, and the indicators and metrics are lagging, so I don't have any specific, like, hey, how did we measure that? I do have some. However, I saw the organization on aircraft carrier much more effective as we scaled enterprise IT at the edge.
Thanks. Which kind of begs the question, not to get too far off script here, but for the entire panel, is there still a distinction between enterprise and the edge? I don't know who wants to jump in there.
Do you want to go first?
So I think it then goes into the definition of the enterprise. An enterprise assumes you are prescribing some services to those devices at the edge, which can also add some uniqueness in the approaches for those use cases that you're taking. But I do believe that as we provide enterprise at the edge, it's really synonymous. That edge could be you operating a tactical node pretty much anywhere, CONUS or OCONUS.
So,
Brian?
So I would think that our understanding of what the disconnected space has evolved. So if you go back to 2017, pre-cloud, pre where the department was in cloud, we thought disconnected was, hey, we have to operate fully disconnected. And there's still scenarios in the Navy, Marine Corps, Army, where disconnected is, hey, I'm just disconnected and I'm just running. But where it's evolved over the last several years, not just in the department and with our cloud service providers, but where we've come from a connected state. You look at, we originally ran on geosync satellites holistically. We're now transitioning away from that and going towards LEO, so low Earth orbit, high Earth orbit, where you have a faster connectivity. We have faster connectivity. those are more prevalent, where geosync is you're running on 8 or 10 of those. They're all on the equator. They run lower bandwidth, lower connection speeds. So I would say where we've gone from a disconnected mindset, and not just where it's functional, where we've also switched from, hey, everything is DDIL, everything is that's how we have to think of. Where on this edge space, we've gone to more of an operational edge, and that started to transition in the department, I would say around the 2022, 2023 timeframe at the leadership level. And it started to transition down into the force, not just from how people think, but how they're building their technologies, and also for cloud service providers. If you look at how cloud service providers, us as Zscaler as a security provider, you look at Amazon, you look at Microsoft, you look at the hyperscalers all the way down, how they're building their technologies to deliver for the force. We're not thinking about, hey, I need to run disconnected all the time. And I think also the department is looking at it as, hey, I need to run more from an operational perspective, more consistently.
One fascinating thing on this part is I think we already actually operate in this mindset that we would think of DDIL, and I think he phrased it perfectly, which is we should think of DDIL as more like an offline mode. Many of the applications do have offline mode capability, and that's what you're syncing data to a device that you are using when it is offline, and I think that's a good way to think about it. And you have to get the data to the device to operate in offline mode, which you can use with modern day enterprise at the edge when you have to go offline.
Yep. All right. Well, and speaking of what's changed, not just in the last 10 years, but even 5 years, zero trust has gone from being kind of a fanciful term that's used throughout industry, and it seems that ZTA has actually made strides in the past few years. So for Ryan, we've seen the Navy achieving its first zero trust milestone ahead of schedule back in 2024. How do you see that impacting things moving forward?
Yeah, I think if you look at where the Navy started, kind of COVID kicked off where the Navy was going to go, and really what they did with Flank Speed, really starting on the 365 effort as their beginning for what Flank Speed was going to be. They looked at their core things that they were trying to get after was securing access. They're trying to go after reducing the attack surface and trying to figure out how they were going to do global experience at large from a zero trust, not to zero trust. Everybody kind of put zero trust as this word that we had to go after. Similar to like Agile, it kind of became a dirty word in the department that kind of got thrown around. But I think holistically what the Navy tried to do first, and I think a lot of organizations do, is they had to get their arms wrapped around an identity issue first. And not just identity, but also attribution, because you can fix identity, but if you don't figure out the attribution that are tied to those identities, you don't get to go to the holistic issues that go into the EDR space, that go into the SASE space, that go into the SD-WAN space, because that's where the attributions go into how you apply policies across all of those boards. What I would start to say is I think the Navy over the last several years had where they've gone from that and evolved from just the 365 focus in the beginning and started to take that long term, and how they've kind of marked the beginning phase from the enterprise space and moved into like where we're starting to partner with them is if you start to look at Navy has like 95 or 93 different bespoke networks that they have to manage. You can start to look at how you're going to do microsegmentation across the board, policy implementation across the board, and how you bring those together from a single pane of view from a zero trust perspective, and then how you can highlight zero trust, integrating all of those capabilities together.
Kenny, from your perspective of 20 years of integrating a variety of tactical solutions and systems, given what you just heard these panel managers, what do you see as an LSI being those kinds of challenges, and how do you achieve success?
I think the biggest thing that we've seen is that we've injected a lot of technology into the fleet over the last 10 or 15 years or so, and we see this cadence of technology capability sets in the float environments basically increasing exponentially more and more, right? I think from an operating and from an LSI perspective, two major perspectives that we focus on is number one is the ability for us to continue to field, modernize, and sustain these like network systems out in the fleet, essentially, at a large-scale enterprise. I think that the manning required to do that is substantial, the knowledge base also. The thing that we truly try to focus on, I was actually going to ask Captain this question, was that the manning requirements to operate, maintain, sustain these network systems in the fleet has been pretty daunting for the Navy. I think there's always struggling with manning, basically. We try to provide that as a LSI as much as possible, the training aspect of it, to make sure the technical documentation and everything that the end user has is seamless and easy as much as possible. For Captain, the question really is, with Flank Speed Edge, do you see a huge difference in the manning capability sets, and has that changed any operations for you, sir?
So I think about it from a how do we free up sailors' time to be most effective with the manning that we have, and Flank Speed Edge has helped us in there, and I'll go to the specific use case, which is we were demonstrating unified endpoints during Abraham Lincoln's deployment. And I pulled this out of my bag because I have one. This is an example of a unified endpoint. It's just a computer, but it was homing to native flank speed architecture. I had 70 of these on Abraham Lincoln, and what that allowed me to do was interoperate Microsoft Teams with every product support representative from a particular program. What I was able to do then with that was get left of issues and prevent CAS reps from occurring, because if we were at a point to where it was beyond our technical capability, all I had to do was send a Teams chat to a subject matter expert, which the response to those could typically mitigate potentially hours, days, or even weeks of troubleshooting. When we do that and we start to have that approach, the ship should be knowledgeable to own all their systems with their expertise on board. However, commonly, we just want to ask a question. And by having a medium to do that with a unified endpoint, I can get left of issues, I can have higher ownership of my configuration control, and I can get left of potentially combat limiting issues by having a flank speed type capability on a ship. And we're getting there. And I believe that will help free up to use the manning that I have the best that I can.
Appreciate that. So as we're discussing the afloat capabilities, kind of pivoting back to undersea, for Jason there, what kind of future role do you see Exwix Oceans Department and yourself playing as we evolve our network and communication capabilities from where they're going afloat to an undersea capability at the edge?
Yeah, thank you. So Exwix is a fairly new warfare center. So 2012 is when we actually became a warfare center. So we're brand new compared to the NAVC infrastructure that's out there. Like I said, we do have core capabilities within the infrastructure side of the house, which is a normal NAVFAC thing. But on the undersea environment, I think there's a lot of room for us to get out of the strategic and get get out of the tactical rather and into the operational and strategic kind of mindset. So as we're talking out here, what I would ask Captain or Ryan or even Kenny is, what can the Warfare Center do for you to help you shake some of those bugs out before they end up going down and onto your ship? An example is Task Force 59. Task Force 59 is an innovation task force, but they're also operational. And so they have a lot of surface elements right now that they're using, and they're trying to tie it in to C2 systems and things like that. We're trying to get involved there and see what we can do from a Warfare Center perspective, so we're not putting failed prototypes in the hands of warfighters right off the bat. We're trying to take some of that stress back off of Task Force 59. So, Captain or Ryan, what are some of the things that, from a Warfare Center perspective, that we can do to shake out before we hand some of that tech over to you guys?
So I think from a vendor perspective, I think the importance is understanding how the tech works and how it integrates back into, from a cloud service provider perspective, and what we can do to secure it from a partnership side, and how the warfighter is actually going to use it overall. Like with Flank Speed Edge, like how we're going to be tying into the HCI stacks and working from a Microsoft perspective, like that's an important capability that like Zscaler has been working with PEO Digital on. Like how it's important to get in early and often on the prototyping and on the capability side from a vendor perspective always. And when I was on the government side, like that was something that I always impressed upon the hyperscalers when I did. And then when I was on the DoD CIO side, it was, I worked with Hypori, I worked with other organizations that I had to do. So I would say that it's important for every organization that's on the contracting side or in the development side to always work with vendors, bring them in early and often and say, hey, how can I do this? Don't be afraid to have the hard conversations. Even though you might be in an acquisition cycle, you don't need to bring them into an acquisition to say, hey, this is what I want to do. You just need to say, hey, this is potentially what we're looking at, and how could this fit in, even though you may not do an award to them. Obviously, you have to do the firewalls and stuff, but I think that having that kind of conversation, it strengthens the product that you're going to deliver at the end state and how you can do the integrations long term for who you need to deliver for, not just for the Navy, but for the larger department, because what you're going to turn around and do is the Navy's going to use it, and then what's going to, there's 100% the Air Force or the Army or one of the 4 to 8 organizations is just going to rip and replace, because they don't want to go back and redevelop. They want to look at what you have, and they want to see how they can integrate it.
So the warfare centers are all disparate organizations around the U.S. and they have detachments around the world. Right now, a lot of the way they provide support to the fleet is by physically going to a ship, or calling the ship by a phone or an email. I think the way we can go quicker on that is to have a solid software-defined network architecture that the warfare centers are a part of, because then with the right cyber and technology in place, they could have a presence on the ship without having to go there or without having to call on the phone and wait for a sailor to reply back. I think we got to figure out how to get that right and scale software-defined networks within the warfare centers so they can all provide the most value without physically having to be on board a ship.
Yeah, thank you for that, Captain and Ryan. I think along those lines, from both of your perspectives, the network architecture will be great. I think the other thing that I'm going to do from a warfare center perspective is have the industry network built with the agile contracting actions. So when these opportunities arise, and maybe we get that software architecture up, so we have that common knowledge, and then we have already tied into industry to solve some of those particular problems, and then also tie in the UARC system with all of academia that are tied into that system as well. But remaining agile is the key.
And that's a good point. It takes a partnership. And Ryan, kind of to that point, we've seen in the last few years, Zero Trust has accelerated from a theoretical exercise to a fleet-wide deployment and fleet-wide implementation. What is enabling that to go faster?
The political answer is mandates are really great, but I would say mandates are not what really drives everything. I think mandates is what draws attention to everything, but it's not what actually gets everything solved. So I think mandates are great from the department. I think that the Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office inside of the DoD CIO has done a great job of drawing attention to each of the services of what the requirement was that needed to get done, because I think holistically sometimes we get stuck on our foxholes about what we want to do. But what they did was they drove a holistic framework about, hey, this is how we need to get after it at large, more specifically to the department, because if you look at TIC 3.0 for the federal side, it's more specific to the Fed, not really to the Department of Defense. Then I would say if you start to look at how the landscape has changed across the board over the last several years, we had a real castle and moat kind of, we've had a castle and moat perspective. Look at the Pentagon. The Pentagon is like firewall upon firewall upon firewall upon firewall. I mean, granted, that's great, but you can't fight that way all the time because you just can't manage it. So I think what you've started to look at is how sophisticated the threats of. You start to look at how AI starts to play into that. You look at how a kid with a laptop can come in and completely hack your network. So you have to look at how you can get away from a perimeter defense and how you can manage security by application, by identity, how you can separate that. And the services started to become real to that because of the types of threats that have come across the board, both in the commercial sector and in the defense space and in the intelligence space. I think the cultural shifts, because of the changes that have come up from CIO and down and then bottom up, I think have been really great. The scalability. You can start to take away the hardware pieces, the hardware components in certain levels, and start to put in the layers that come from different cloud service providers. You can bring in the EDR sides, so the endpoint detection. You can bring in the identity side. You can bring in the SASE component. You can bring in the SD-WAN and start to take away all the things that are required from a physical component, but then layer in those capabilities into more succinct capabilities. And then I would also start to say what kind of layers into that even more so is the single pane. You can start to really get after the single pane of glass of bringing in a functionality of how that all ties together from a policy engine perspective, and then provide that back to either a SOC, a NOC, a commander who needs to have complete visibility of how that functions, and instead of having to run each one individually. Because how we've run previously from a perimeter perspective is I put ACLs across the board, and then what happens is as soon as somebody gets access, they can run all the way across, they can run rampant across the organization. When you do the zero trust side of the house, I give you access to an application, I blindfold you, only come into this one space. You don't get to go anywhere else. I run your identity, I run your attribute, I run you here. That's the thing that we're trying to prevent. We're trying to keep going, and we're trying to prevent the lateral movement across the board.
And you bring up a good point there in scalability. The Navy CTO last fall in a small gathering said, we don't really have a technology problem, the Navy has a scalability problem. We're constantly getting great ideas, but how do we implement them? So Kenny, from your perspective, having to migrate from legacy systems, sometimes you're doing tech insertion, sometimes it's a tech transition.
Yeah.
How do you grapple with that to keep up with the pace of change?
I think the critical thing is be early on in the research side as much as possible, be early in on the engineering side. One of the critical things that we do participate in a lot, basically pilot to production essentially. We have our engineers work with the program offices to make sure that we're part of that engineering design so we can learn it from the very beginning, right? What the intent of that engineering design, that tech insertion, what it's supposed to do. The critical thing for us to scale is at that point is to document. I know engineers don't like to hear this. We like to push technical debt in the back as much as possible, document later. But that is the critical way, by documenting, training, refining that training so that you can essentially move the skill level set down as much as possible so we can field more systems for the same cost. So we've done that a lot. I know that it's not the tech writers or engineers' favorite thing, but having that standard, that rigor, we can go back and make sure that we deploy consistently and deploy right every single time. So,
Thanks.
yeah.
So getting back to some of leveraging this experience for the future, Captain Smith, you've had some very unique experiences, and now in your new role at POC4I, how has your experience on the time with the Lincoln as well as with Flank Speed Edge reshaped your thoughts and approach to the position you're moving into now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of parity with how we use our personal devices and our work devices with how the fleet should also do that. And I'll really 2 points there. I believe that the developers and the users should be on the same network. So if you develop a network, but your users, but you don't use that network, right? There's a gap there. So that's also another reason why I'm kind of a fan of the unified approach, is because the developers and the users can be on the same network, and I think we will mitigate challenges quicker in that vein. Also, how do we use data in our modern world? We go to websites and we use apps, and it's really no different at the edge right now. And apps and websites is the enterprise. And so we should be able to utilize modern cloud connectivity and extensibility of apps and websites to deploy those at the edge, which again kind of adds some abstraction to what the edge even means. But those apps and websites should be equally usable and functional for the developers that are in their workplace, so that we can keep parity of what our warfighters are using at the edge with how those services are working. Because when developers are on those apps and websites daily and they can validate that they're working, they're probably going to be ready for the fleet when it's time to really get after it.
Go ahead, Kenny.
Captain, just a quick question, just talking about apps and again, back to IT manning. Have you seen the ITs that come on board over the last few generations or so? Do you think that there's a cultural shift in terms of expectation in user interface, that when they operate a platform, they have a certain expectation that it should function easily, simply, and has that shifted? And do you think that the developers of the systems adopted to that cultural shift, sir?
Yeah, there's definitely a modern day gap. Use of personal devices has really shrunk down over the years. You know, everyone had their powerful laptop, and then they had tablets. Now most of the sailors on the ship, they have a smartphone, and it's using those commercial apps and services of which the companies have done a lot of human factors and human systems integration to design those graphical user interfaces around the experience that you get from using the app. Right now, when we go to our modern afloat systems, they don't have that level of simplicity nor graphical user interface. What I personally have seen is that we typically break down when we rely on an IT to do command line level programming. And right now we have an over-reliance on our readiness based on issues that are solved in the command line. And I believe that if we could have some simplicity and parity in our human factors of how you design troubleshooting applications, that we could probably get around a lot of those and make the systems more usable for those newer ITs that are just coming out of their C schools.
Kat might want to add to a comment that you just made, and it's actually one of the biggest challenges that we face from a Warfare Center perspective, which is getting the end user feedback, having the engineers play with the toys that they're handing over to the fleet. That's not always easy, and I'll tell you, in my time at the Warfare Center, I very rarely see an actual sailor come into our doors and play with the toys that we're putting together for them. What we've done with collaboration with Panama City is actually put engineers in with NSW when they're looking at specific capability gaps. So, which is not always the best. A PhD talking to an operator is not necessarily gold right there. But yeah, it's getting that feedback directly from the operator or directly from the sailor or whoever is like a little gold nugget for a Warfare Center. So I think we need to figure out ways to get better at getting that direct feedback from, because a lot of times we're talking to resource sponsors and the leadership that owns the budget for that particular capability gap, but we don't always have access to the person that's actually going to be touching the buttons.
And I think, sorry.
No. So I was gonna dovetail off. So being like the token Army guy up here. No, so I'd say the
Who
Army
cares?
Yeah. So I got to go to the Army Software Factory. I've been there a couple times, and I know that that Don has been setting up they've had Black Pearl for a little while, but I mean it's kind of like moving along because everything kind of got put into flank speed. But if you look at how Army Software Factory has been doing app development, they've got about 50 teams that do their software factory development for apps, but they actually are working with the tactical elements for their application development and getting user feedback directly. They do it on a daily basis. I think they do like a weekly scrum with the tactical force to get feedback on app development for the environment. And I would like to see the Navy replicate that from a software factory perspective. And I know that it's just coming along, but I got to see that in real time about 5 months ago on the software factory side. But it speaks to the question that you asked, and it speaks to the problem set that you're talking about. Army Software Factory has been up for a lot longer down in the Austin space, but I think that it would be a really great feedback tool for what Flank Speed Edge is doing and utilizing, but also from an app perspective and a user feedback perspective. But they're doing real-time feedback loops with the workforce.
And there's another fascinating strategy about that I've been kind of thinking about over the last year, which is, so as an example, the USS Abraham Lincoln, the ship's force, the average age of the sailor was 20.8 years old. So that's, you sum up all the years divided by the number of people, the average age is 20.8 years old. Now generally what that means is the new sailor on a ship is kind of like a new professional. And one way we can kind of get ahead of the feedback loop is new professionals on programs. They should be able to read and understand the program and the capability that they're delivering. And the way to get ahead on that is, let's say your program X, Y, or Z, have some of your new professionals on your program see if that app or website is usable, and if you can navigate it using the product support documentation And the feedback that those new professionals on programs will provide will probably be fairly similar to what the sailors provide. Then you could optimize internally and then physically go to the actual new professionals on the warfighting side to see what their feedback is. Now, the gap there would be you don't necessarily have the operational parts of a new professional on a program going through an app just like you would as a sailor as though they're operating it. However, I think you could probably get 60, 80% of the feedback and iron that out and make updates before you actually need the operational input.
Everybody always says that's great, but every time we try to bring new technology, new approach, new apps or whatever, everybody pumps the brakes and says, well, how secure is that? So for Ryan, where have you seen the most operational security impact where Zero Trust has been applied for all this innovation at the edge?
Oh man. So if you look at the you look at the tactical space, honestly, where things are progressing, I think is where the services are trying to adopt across the board. There's no one size fix all for everything. I think the services are gradually moving towards an actual solution set for. You go back to like the Zero Trust model of how they're doing it. If you look at on the tactical edge side, enhanced security on the degraded space, even with like what we're doing with it on the Zscaler side, or with how we're doing disconnected space. So doing policy engine in a disconnected space is not exactly the easiest thing to solve, because you have to do the reach back to the cloud. Every cloud service provider has to provide a disconnected solution set. But how you would do that is providing, ensuring that your policy enforcement point is able to run in a disconnected space for a period of time. Right now, we're up to like the 90-day space. So we would provide a policy enforcement point for an application, for a on-premise capability that can service identity, DNS, and applications that are running in real time. The other thing is ensuring that you're able to work with coalition partners, because at the tactical edge, what we really need to solve is how coalition partners are able to work with one another. It's not just about being able, the Army, the Navy, Air Force, doing kumbaya moments with each other. Right. It's about really being able to work with our coalition partners, because really when you go talk to the Navy, they're not talking to each other. They're talking with Australia. They're talking with UK. They're talking amongst all the other nations. So providing a capability where they're able to trust one another, not just in a way that it's just like, hey, we're going to share this way, but actual seamless communication. The only way that you can really do that is have panes where there's a security boundary between one another. I'd say the agility space is another one. How we've been able to go from, I mentioned it earlier, having a geosync to having the more low Earth orbit, higher Earth orbit, to have higher data capabilities. It's enabled cloud service providers to provide real-time capabilities to ships, to tactical capabilities. And then also supporting multi-domain. Multi-domain capabilities have been kind of instrumental, both, especially in the Indo-Pacific. I'd say outside of that, the real takeaway is ensuring that no matter where you are, ensuring that they have resilient comms, security capabilities everywhere they go. That's kind of the important piece. But if you're not able to do that, at the end of the day, all they're doing is just communicating unencrypted and unsecure.
Yeah. Well, to piggyback on that for Jason, more broadly, what kind of security challenges do you see as you're working with, you mentioned your lab full of toys there, right? So from a maritime operations, as you're developing and figuring out which toys fit where, what are the challenges that you're seeing?
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with Ryan wholeheartedly here that there's, we talk about a lot of undermanned vehicles that are collecting all sorts of data and bringing it back. Eventually it has to connect to the infrastructure, and that's one of our limitations right now. It just has to connect to that infrastructure. So anything other than that right now, I have a vision of trying to create a portal, a website, whatever you want to call it, an access point that has bathymetry data from all over the world on it with different classification rankings, and everybody has access to their particular level. But that in itself is not achievable right now, because we don't have the ability to have platforms that have multi-level security that's accessible in a web-based delivery mechanism. So that would be an absolute capability game changer if we could get something like that where you can hand ocean data to the edge, we'll say. And so I think that's, we just had a good conversation about that earlier today, and I think it will come, but I don't think it will come before something happens with some of our adversaries in 2027. I think that's going to be the driving force to say maybe security isn't as important as we thought. Maybe actually having bullets go down range is more important. But until we get to that point, we're going to have to try to build around the framework that we currently have. But
I think
hopefully it'll change.
One way to go fast at scale is to design and build at the industry level for cyber. So just like if you're going to buy a product, it'll say, hey, it's designed to this mil spec. You know, it's got some cool carbon fiber. It looks pretty awesome. Imagine if the software tools that we buy from industry are already designed for cyber. And what I specifically mean is, as we get software and hardware capabilities, we have to stig it. We have to have a whole software cycle that supports our authority to operate. We could go faster if those tools that we're buying were already designed and plug and play, stigged, and have that framework that meets the federal requirements. And I think that typically once we have an ATO, we're able to purchase faster. If we can get to meeting requirements to get ATOs faster, that would help go faster at scale.
Yeah, Cap, I want to add to that. That's 1,000% correct. I was looking at a technology on a UUV that I wanted to utilize for EOD troops, and I was told that it was not built around the security. They were trying to patch the security on top of the UUV, and that to get it to where it needed to be cyber secure was going to cost way more than the UUV was worth and take way more time than what we have. So absolutely, build the security first and then build the toy around it.
You bring up an interesting point. Like, you know, ATOs are a lot of time the long pole in the tent, right? And everybody's trying to operate off of somebody else's or trying to move faster. You know, Kenny, I know you're dealing with this problem regularly. How can we work together to make that process go easier while still preserving what we need to do to be safe, secure, while also being fast?
Yeah, I think it goes back to us as LSIs being involved in the SysComs and the COCOMs requirements upfront, essentially. You know, we talk about getting feedback from the fleet as the in-service agents for a lot of ships. A lot of commands. We get feedback directly from the sailors and from the mission owners, basically, on what doesn't work. We're on the deck plate. They tell us what breaks, we know what breaks, and we feed that back to the engineer as much as possible. I think that being part of that process also to give basically real-world feedback at scale and almost in real time, basically the very next day, and being that taken into consideration for the engineering cycle, that helps a lot also. But definitely working directly with the mission owners and working with the systems directly.
And Captain White, you've obviously experienced that. So, I mean, Flank Speed Edge is currently operating in an unclassed environment. Do you feel that it one day may play a role in the fleet's decision advantage tool set in the future? And how would you like to see the Navy enterprise networks evolve in the next decade to support the warfighting mission?
Yeah, predominantly right now we're just using Flank Speed at the IL-5 unclassified CUI level. It's definitely going to go up to higher classification levels. I think that we have to be smart in how we integrate that and how we scale it. I kind of see a world where we use the high-speed transport options that are available. We have to be able to extend those higher classified environments smartly over those transport paths to really get the most value out of that at the edge. What I've personally seen is with the proliferation of low Earth orbiting satellites, the balance of speed versus latency. So that's always a question of well, what does it matter? People may think you could have a high bandwidth connection, but if it's high latency, you're going to have issues. And largely, I think we balance speed versus latency in how we overlay higher classification versions of flank speed over those capabilities, and I think we will see a dramatic effect. I kind of see that as how we should scale moving forward, and we should use our industry counterparts to help us scale that smartly across all those services so we really get the most value for that taxpayer dollar.
And Ryan, along those same lines, how do you see Zero Trust improving warfighter capabilities at the edge in the next decade, both with the Navy and coalition partners in their networking and communication systems?
So I'd say today there's a lot of things that could change things pretty rapidly. A lot of it comes back down to there's a lot of policies in place that Zero Trust was not really if you look at policy is usually 10 to 15 years behind of where capabilities are. So zero trust was something that was put in place in the last few years from a department perspective. But if you go back and look at how policies are implemented across the department and worldwide, so even if you go to UK, you go to Australia, there are things that are prohibitive of the way the department and our 5I partners or others that want to operate in these spaces holistically, both operationally and from an enterprise perspective. There's capabilities with SIM where I could layer in a SIM technology that even Zscaler has, where basically I could put a SIM in a UUV or a UAV or an IoT OT device or in a mobile device, and I could basically secure that technology, that SIM, put policy all the way down from a cloud down to that device, and it'd be secure from the path all the way up to the exchange and up to the cloud service provider. Any policy you've put into your cloud all the way back down. But there are things that prohibit whenever we start to go into, hey, I want to do that between myself, and I want to do that between myself, and I want to do that between a coalition partner. So I would say, how do things advance in the next few years? Technology is obviously always going to continue to advance. I think the pieces that will advance the most my hope is that policy will catch up within our organizations over the next few years, which will enable technology even more so. I also think that in that same vein, as you've seen over the last 7 years with cloud service providers, in 2017, 2018, the only people that were really in this space were two or three of about two of the hyperscalers. In 2022, you had four. Now you've seen there are major cloud service providers, Zscaler, pick your poison, that have now gotten up to the IL5 space. Zscaler is going into the classified space. There are several people that are starting to move into the classified space. Give it a few more years, you're going to see even more in the classified space going into the TS space. So I think as that starts to progress, you're going to see more people that can support the capabilities that the department needs or our partners need globally that can actually go into the mission space and do the things that they need to be successful, be lethal inside that space. I kind of mentioned, I hit it on the IoT and the edge side. I think limiting the cyber attack impact is going to be really important. We look at, hey, we see classified is just hey, it's classified, it's disconnected, it's air gapped, but it's just as susceptible as our unclassified space. It has to be protected the exact same way as our unclassified space is, because while we're out at the edge, it's more susceptible than we are in the enterprise space from my perspective, because we tend to do things in a different kind of way. When I was in Afghanistan as a staff sergeant, as a warrant officer, sometimes we do things a different kind of way than we're supposed to, but it happens.
Got to get it done.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ryan, you were mentioning coalition partners, and I'm just curious, have you seen any roadblocks, or what's your impression on coalition partners networks as they're trying to access information from us and to exchange information?
No, so I would say
some thoughts on that.
From a coalition partner perspective, where we were as a department, where we are and where we were as a department is we were moving forward on cloud. Each of them are now in their procurement processes with the hyperscalers to do their classified cloud deployments, which means our cloud service providers have already deployed their classified infrastructure. They're in the process of doing their procurement to do their classified deployments now, which means that they don't have the infrastructure already in place within UK, within Australia. So they're a few years behind us inside that, within that vein, within that aspect. So we are a few years ahead, and we want to support them inside our space. There are certain things, certain policies that prevent that from being fully successful. That's kind of the thing I was leaning in on. Mm-hmm. I think that there are roads there are walls that are being broken down, or at least that we're looking over to see how we can fix that from a security perspective. Do I think companies like Zscaler and others help fix that? 100%. But again, that's about making sure that people understand what are the policy things that we can do from a technical perspective that get people comfortable to get past that capability. From our partners, are they adopting capabilities like ours, like other competitors? 100%. But they're a little bit further behind inside that aspect. But it's just because they just don't have it. They're getting towards that space. And certain hyperscalers have said, hey, I'm not going to go there. I'm only going to use, only certain ones have decided to go into that business model.
Mm.
Appreciate that. And I do want to save a few minutes for questions, so if anybody, there is a microphone there in the middle. But as we wrap up here, I think, Jason, as we're talking about the next decade, and your role as matchmaker between capability developers and people that have capability gaps, how do you and the Warfare Center adjust and pivot to look over the horizon there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is we got to keep doing things like this. We got to keep reaching out to industry. We got to keep our finger on the thumb of what is coming next, what those policy challenges are, what those the end user feedback challenges are, and try to tackle them head on. We can't sit back and wait. We have to be leaning forward on all of them. And then it comes down to your strong network. A Warfare Center can't do it by itself. It has to have an industry base, and it has to have other DoD and actually other U.S. government partners. And you have to utilize the best of us in a collective collaboration to be able to move that bubble forward. Who knows what the next 10 years are going to bring? And to be honest with you, in the infrastructure world, I hope these guys aren't as successful and smart as they think they are, because then I won't have a job. But 10 years is a long time. I mean, who knew what we were 10 years ago, the things we're going to be doing, or the things that we are doing now. So we just have to, maintain those relationships. It is all about relationships. So we'll continue to push forward.
No, it definitely takes an ecosystem. So with that, were there any questions from the audience? Anybody of our panel members? Well, if not, I want to be the first to thank you all. Everybody up here, I want to thank you for your service, both to U.S. Navy and the U.S. government. I think our panel members deserve a round of applause. Thank you. All right. That concludes our panel. Thank you all very much for attending.